Hi everyone, welcome to another Broken Meeple review. As always, I like to engage with my community, so if you can leave a thumbs up and a comment about your thoughts on the video, that would be great. And also don't forget that there's a mini Patreon campaign if you want to go the extra mile to support the channel a little bit further. So today we've got Bitoku to talk about, a pretty hefty box I gotta say. Now if you remember what I did with Gaming Rules and Paul Grogan on his channel, we did a live stream talking about the hotness of Essen, and this had the most thumbs on Board Game Geek. Of course, you know what I'm like when it comes to trusting Board Game Geek rankings, but you know, it had the most thumbs. This was clearly the hotness of Essen in terms of anticipated games. Now Devir games don't tend to do heavy games much, and this is what worried me slightly. They tend to do light and at most midweight level games, and they've done pretty well at that. This is definitely venturing outside of their comfort zone, but I applaud anybody who does try to venture out of their comfort zone, because I do want to see new ideas and innovations where possible. This is a heavy point salad. They're definitely trying hard to do something different here. The question is, did it pay off? The Great Spirit has been wisely and righteously governing the lives of all who live within the forest. Its time in our world has left a mark, and the echo of its actions shall resonate for centuries throughout every corner and meadow of the woods. However, its time is coming to an end, and the old forest needs a worthy successor. In Bitoku, players take on the role of spirits, fulfilling all sorts of tasks to prove that they are worthy of undertaking the duties of the Great Spirit of the forest. Will you be chosen as the new protector and warden of this wondrous and mystical place? Bitoku is at its core a heavy point salad game, and by point salad, if you're unaware, I mean that pretty much anything you do in this game will get you victory points in some way or another. But the core mechanics used are hand management with the yōkai cards that you can play for various effects, set collection, which accounts for a lot of the different tokens that you can acquire in order to beef up your player board, as well as worker placement with the dice that you use in order to cover up spaces, again to trigger various actions. The game takes place over 4 rounds, all of which play out the same. Players will play yōkai cards onto their board in order to trigger effects and unlock their dice. With these dice, they'll be able to send them out to various forest regions to trigger other actions. As well as this, you'll be able to eventually cross your dice over the river to alternate forest actions, which allow you to acquire more yōkai cards and also Bitoku cards. These Bitoku cards allow you to gain points and effects by using your Meeple to walk across the path in order to trigger their effects. Of course, being a point salad, there is a plethora of other things that you can do to get a victory point here and there. Firstly, the path at the top of the board is where you can walk your pilgrims in order to acquire more bonuses and victory points. You can acquire dragonflies and combine them with mitamas spirits with various other bonuses and that. You can build buildings across the forest regions which you and your opponents may utilize depending on the dice you place, and you can acquire crystals which you can place on your board in order to generate income or resources each round, or to grant other scoring opportunities depending on what actions you do. Did I mention you also have tracks for kodamas spirits, which are point majorities at the end of the game, and vision cards, which represent personal objectives that you have to complete? Yes, there truly is a lot of options in this game, but each round will play out much the same. You'll exhaust all your dice and cards and all your river crossings before moving on to the next round. After 4 rounds, players will total up all their victory points acquired during the game, as well as some endgame scoring, and of course, the player with the most is the winner.
Of course!
Bitoku quotes a hefty time of 120 minutes on the box. This is much longer than any of their previous games, and in some cases that's actually an understatement. It really does depend on how many players you're with, although to be honest, I've struggled to get this game done in under 90 minutes with solo or 2-player. There is a lot going on that you've got to keep track of, as well as a hefty amount of setup, rules teach, and takedown. With 4 players, I kid you not, it is easy for this game to breach the 3-hour mark, and that's not necessarily including teaching the game in the first place. This game is long, and I would dare say a bit too long. There's a lot going on in this game, but we'll get onto this in more detail later. Not enough, I feel, to justify this time length. A lot of effort has to be put into the setup. You've got to put up dragonfly tokens, mitamas spirit tokens, the building tokens, the rock tokens, the dream tokens. Then you've got to put out the yōkai cards and the Bitoku cards and set up all your player boards with the pilgrim tokens and everything else. There's a lot to get through, and believe me, if you're playing this solo, that kind of setup is enough to make you want to consider burning the game. It really does take a long time, and bear in mind you've got to put it all away at the end of the day. Thankfully, it just goes back in the box. Now, with that duration, you can cut it down a little bit if you don't have to teach the game again and you're familiar with it, but still you're looking at a good 2 to 2.5 hours to play a decent 3 to 4 player length game of this, and for a point salad, that's quite a bit longer than a lot of other opportunities out there. So, question is that a bit long for you? It is a bit long for me. Now, as much as this game is beautiful to look at, and we'll get onto that in more detail later, when it comes to ease of play, it does get in the way a bit. Looking at this board is one of the most daunting experiences you can ever have. It looks like there's a ton going on, and there is, but you don't realise that there's actually only so much going on until you actually get into the game and have played it and been taught it. The rulebook is quite extensive, and even though the rules themselves aren't too tricky to understand, apart from a few typos here and there, the rulebook is not very well structured. It does one of the things that I hate the most in rulebooks. It goes through the setup, fine. Big diagram, setup, no problem. But then it decides to go into the round sequence in full while explaining terminology that isn't explained until the second half of the rulebook.
What happened to then?
We passed that.
When?
Just now. We're at now.
Go back to then.
I hate rulebooks that are structured like this because whilst I'm reading the first bit, I'm hearing stuff that I don't know what you're talking about. You know, what is the Veil of the Wild or whatever you want to call it in this game, and more on that later, but you know, I don't know what this means, and what is a Bitoku card? It's like, you know, okay, it's this card, but what do you mean walk along its path? You know, it's no good throwing all this terminology at me until you explain it. And with that structure in the rulebook, with sidebars as well, which is another thing I hate, because you'll read a bit there and it's like, well, hang on, what do I do with the pilgrims? Oh, the sidebar has it there. It's just, you've got to really search for a lot of these rules. You can understand it when you get them, but you have to find them first. It's almost like a puzzle in itself. On top of that, the sheer scale of the board, as well as all the stuff that's all over it, does make it a little bit hard to visualize various areas. You're trying to see, oh wait, okay, so that icon on that dragonfly token is what exactly? Oh, I see, right. And that bit's the dream board, right? That bit's the path. That bit, where's the bit that we put our dice for turn order? Oh, over there. It's like everything kind of blends in a bit much and does make it a little bit hard to tell what's going on. Now, with those negatives in mind, it's better to be taught this game rather than learn from the rulebook. Definitely, my friends would agree on that. But once you actually do start playing, there's not a lot of complexity in these rules. And for what mechanics you have going on in this game, it almost feels like there's a few too many rules to explain what is happening. When you get going and you've actually been taught the game does flow at a relatively smooth rate. But when you realise that you're mainly just, right, I'll play a couple of cards, move up a couple of dice, maybe cross them over and grab another card in that, you think, blimey, I was taught a lot of rules in this game, but there's only this much happening. It's possibly a little bit overcomplicated for what it actually is. Yes, it is a heavy point salad, but I reckon that if it was streamlined a little bit and the rulebook was laid out a little bit better, it actually would feel a little bit more like a midweight game, in fact. But I don't know, that's kind of down to personal preference. But as I say, the rulebook is not perfect, and it definitely is going to be a little bit of a slog to get it learned. I mean, believe me, I had to lay it out and do a couple of round playthroughs in order to like, oh right, now it's starting to click. And so I'm not the biggest fan of wanting to teach this game on a regular basis for just how much is involved. You ideally want to have the same people playing all the time in order to avoid that. So being a point salad, there's a lot of options that you have, and certainly that is one of the plus points here. You can go after dragonflies, mitamas spirits, both, combine them, go after the dream tokens, go after yōkai cards, get the Bitoku cards, walk your pilgrims along the top, get the rocks and put your pilgrims down on your board. There's build buildings, in fact. There's a lot of stuff that you can do, and certainly it does give you a wealth of options and a decent amount of choice. I particularly like the aspect of crossing your dice across the river. That I thought was pretty unique, because most of the times you place a dice down, you do its thing, and then it's kind of left there until the end of the round. But now you have the option to cross it over, reduce its value, and then get the cards at the other end, which you're probably going to want to do as often as you can, really, because you want to get the most out of your dice. But I just thought that was quite cool, because it was almost like two aspects of worker placement. Firstly, you have the fact that people could block your spots for the initial forest region, but then when they cross their die over, the space gets freed up and makes it easier for you to go there. On top of that, in order to go for those particular particular cards, there's only so many slots on the other end, so it's a case of, well, I'm in this forest region, but so are you. Are you going to cross over? Maybe I should cross over now and get it done. Timing is key when you've got other players around, and that is pretty cool and really engaging. Now, I did say that there doesn't seem to be as many mechanics in the game as there are rules to teach, and that certainly is apparent, and that's possibly one of the more slight negatives I have, which is that the game doesn't feel as fulfilling for the duration that it has. I mentioned earlier on that I thought the 2.5 to 3 hour time limit was a bit long, and most of it is because once you're done with that time length, you don't feel like you've played enough of a game to warrant 3 hours. When I played Golem the other week, that thing melted my brain. You are like combo-rific. It's insane. There's loads of stuff you're doing. You're totally thinking throughout the whole game, and when you finish, you feel like you put in a lot of effort. Here, I feel like I grabbed a bunch of tokens, grabbed a couple of cards, grabbed some points here and there, and now the game has ended eventually. It doesn't feel quite as fulfilling as it possibly should.
What the hell was that?
The actions also feel a little bit redundant after a while. There's 5 spaces that you effectively go, 5 forest regions, 4 main ones and the one that does turn order. The one that does turn order and one that gets you resources are chosen very rarely compared to the other 3, which I feel are ultimately better actions. So those tend to get filled up with dice quite quickly, which thus drains all the various buildings and dragonflies and that derive from them, but the other 2 seem to get left behind. And honestly, grabbing turn order is not that important in this. There's a lot of opportunities for you to unlock your die and get them out quick, and there's all sorts of different options that you have that, for me, I found that going last each round really didn't hurt me that much when I've played. I've either won or come second without too much trouble despite being in last from start to finish. And it's kind of bizarre that there's no first player order advantage, well disadvantage in fact, for the turn order at the start. It just says choose at random and go. Hello, have you played any Euro games? Pretty much every single Euro game in history has some kind of advantage for going second, third and fourth in a game, but no, you just do it randomly. In a 3-hour game, you don't have any last player advantages.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
That feels a little bit like a kick in the teeth just before you've even started the game, but as it said, it didn't seem to bother me. But with 2 of the 5 actions not being not particularly useful, then that kind of only leaves 3 main areas that you're going, and that just seems not enough, in fact, really, to keep me engaged. On top of this, the whole die value thing, where you're in a multiplayer game, the die has to be equal to or higher than all the other dice there in order to actually go. That gets redundant pretty much after round 1. The amulets that you spend on the die are pretty much spilling out of every orifice by the time that you get to midway through round 2 and certainly round 3, that where it says all the different actions that you do for values 1 to 6 on your die, just assume that it's pretty much going to be 5 and 6 throughout the rest of the game. Because with all the amulets that you can get, you're constantly spamming out high value dice. I kid you not, the first game I played, 4 of us, in the last round, all of us spammed 6 dice. Like, all of us. Even me, who didn't have that many amulets at the start, all of us had so many by the end that we could just basically put out a 6 value die wherever we wanted to go. And so once we'd finished like crossing over the river and the game was ended, every single die looked the same. We didn't have any deviation whatsoever, which does make a lot of the earlier actions completely worthless. You know, if you go to a spot with a value 1 die, all you get to do is move a kodama forward. Well, that's literally it. Nobody goes to a space with a 1 value die. There's not even worth the space to print the thing. And rarely would you want to trigger anything with a 2 or 3 outside of round 1 when you don't have much of a choice. So quickly, half the actions that you do on this particular forest region space are gone and just not really needed. So you're really just looking at the 4, 5 and 6, and it kind of just feels a bit samey at that point. So there are some weird issues that I have. I can't really talk too much about balance because I've obviously not played the game 20 times, but there's just a few little odds and ends here and there that kind of take me out of the game, particularly, as I say, for the complexity of the rules and the 3-hour duration that a long game can make. Now, I got pretty much nothing negative to say about these aesthetics apart from the slight size of some of the pieces, because this is pretty.
You good looking. You're hot.
This is taking that theme of the Japanese like spirits and that, and really taking it to the next level in terms of the visual style. It is colourful, it is beautiful. The artwork on these yokai cards in particular, and the Bitoku cards, is amazing. The tokens and everything are all decent quality. I love the fact, in fact this is really ingenious, how the board is not only double-sided, but on one side it's for 1 and 2 players with no cutouts, but on the other side it's 3 to 4 players, and you have these die cutout pieces, you know, the cardboard pieces, to slot in and flip over depending on how many players there are. So it's almost like a dual layered board, but only half of it's dual layered. It's kind of weird, but it's a neat idea, and I think more should do it. Of course, having to set up a 3 or 4 player game and get them in the right place and get the right artwork to match up adds to the setup time, as I said before. But yeah, honestly, apart from just some tokens being a little small for my liking, which is a minor blemish, because let's face it, I don't think this board needs to be any bigger. It's already a big table hog as it is. The aesthetics for this game are fantastic. This is the most beautiful game I've seen from Devir Games. It really does pop on the table. That's probably half the reason why it was the most thumbed up rated anticipated game, because people saw a heavy point salad game that looked beautiful and thought, I want to know more about this, and certainly it got me interested as well. And of course, with these great aesthetics can also come a few pieces that are completely redundant. The 3 times tokens for resources, don't need them. You're spending resources as quickly as you acquire them, so why on earth do you need them? Those X tokens that cover actions, they are completely pointless except for the action that allows you to do 2 or 4 options. Because if you have taken the card from a spot, well, you can tell the action's been done because the card's no longer there. There's only 1 card in the spot, so what's the point of the X token? The markers to dictate the round and the phase sequence, it's okay to have a marker for the round itself, and that's a really cool looking big like giant stag token, but the big tree tower thing that does the phases? What's the point in that? You've got 4 phases in the game. First phase is income, done within 5 seconds. Phase 2 is where all the meat happens, okay, phase 2. Phase 3 is literally dictate turn order, and phase 4 is just chuck a card for points and get the rest of your stuff back. So your marker basically goes, stays there for a while, and then goes, and then comes back to phase 2 again. It's like, what is the point of having the track?
Well, that was pointless.
These are minor blemishes, you know, I'm not gonna complain too much about overproduction, but yeah, you could have probably shaved off a few quid here and there if you just not printed these various tokens that became redundant ever so quickly. Now, I did temper my expectations with Immersion because I kind of saw this coming a mile away, but yeah, for everything that is beautiful about this game, for that lovely aesthetic, the great setting of all these like Japanese spirits and that, yeah, there's not much theme in this game. It is a point salad at the end of the day. You're just doing various things of collecting cards and tokens for victory points. In fact, there was threads on BoardGameGeek where people are disputing whether half the stuff that's talked about in this game in terms of, oh, the spirits do this and this yokai does this and, you know, your kodama spirits act like this, you know, it's like, there's a lot of debates as to whether it's even thematically accurate. And I don't know enough about Japanese folklore to understand this stuff or like comment on whether it's all true and that. You know, talk to somebody from Japan who knows this stuff like the back of their hand. But even though it's not necessarily immersively correct, it still is a nice setting. I mean, I am bored to tears of all this like coal, iron and trains and factories and industrial age and medieval and Renaissance, trade in the Mediterranean, all that stuff. I am bored. So at least this came out and said, you know what, we're doing something different. And even though it's not the most rich thematic game ever, I applaud you for at least putting something out. You know, trying to put something out that just looked good and at least gave me kind of like some inspirational stuff, because I spent a couple of months before lockdown started with all the COVID stuff in 2020 just watching a ton of Studio Ghibli movies, and this theme really does bring back a kind of Studio Ghibli Miyazaki type feeling. So all the stuff you've watched, like obviously Princess Mononoke, which is kind of like this is Princess Mononoke the game, you know, half of it, but also the stuff like My Neighbor Totoro, which not my favorite one of the films, but all the other ones where you see all these weird little creatures running around, like Spirited Away is another good example. You know, that animation style kind of feels like what this game is based on, and you know, the designers have already gone on record to say that Princess Mononoke was an inspiration for this game's setting. And honestly, if you want a bit of thematic you know, inclusion, play this game while listening to the Princess Mononoke soundtrack. It actually gels gels together quite well. But yeah, it makes me want to go and check out a few more of the Studio Ghibli Miyazaki films again, including the ones that I haven't watched, like Grave of the Fireflies and Pomnoko. I think there's 2 that I haven't got to yet. But yeah, honestly, if you haven't watched Studio Ghibli films, do so. They're really good. So yeah, not exactly, rich and thematic, but I applaud them for putting something a little bit different from the norm in there, and I think more publishers could benefit from this. Longevity is sadly not as good as it should be for a point salad game though. The tokens that you have pretty much just have the same kind of effect, just slightly changed. The mitamas spirits all basically do the same thing depending on the type. There's only 5 yōkai card types, I believe. One of them is a wild that gets you resources, and the other 4 are specific. One gets you resources frequently, one is good at getting dragonflies, one's good at doing buildings and crystals, and the other one's good at moving your pilgrims on the path at the top, and Bitoku cards. But that's basically what the cards do. There's very minor changes from one kitsune to the other kitsune, but other than that, it's pretty much the same type of card, and you see all the types in one game. You won't see the whole deck, but you'll see all the types. So the fact that you could literally take all those types out of the first game you play with the second bunch of types, and the game won't feel any different. The building tiles are all pretty generic as well, same with all the dream tokens. Some get you a resources and income, some get you points for doing a specific action, but you don't, there's no mechanic in here where you go, right, let's take a bunch of these dream tiles and remove 10 of them before the game starts, and then the rest go on there. There's nothing like that. So nothing really changes from game to game. All the types of strategy that you can go for are available. It's not like when you play it one time, the whole dragonfly strategy doesn't really work and you're all gunning for Bitoku cards. No, everything is there, everything will be in each game, and you just kind of have to go with it. In fact, the only minor difference that you tend to get is the rock tokens that you can put on the bottom of your board. Depending on your player count, you won't necessarily use all of them in the game. In a 4-player game you will though, so you'll see every single one, but with 2 or 3 players it will work, a little bit differently. But it's not enough of a change really to make it last more than a few plays before you really have seen everything. Even the solo mode, doesn't necessarily bring a new element in. It just basically has a kind of AI free card system where you roll dice constantly to see which card gets activated and then go through this ridiculously long and confusing activation cycle to work out, right, so do they have an unlocked die? Do they have a locked die? Is there a die in this region? Is there a contested region? Are you fighting with the opponent for a Bitoku card? Is it one of their favored Bitoku cards? Do they have, is their token active or inactive? It's like, oh my word, this thing drives you nuts with how much you've got to remember this cycle, because you're not going to be able to memorize it. You're going to have to refer back to it a lot. And it got to the point where after 90 minutes to nearly 2 hours, I'm like, I'm spending this long playing a point salad solo game. No, I just don't really want to put in that much time for a solo Euro game. I'd rather go play Fields of Arle or Feast of Odin or something if I'm going to do anything that long for a Euro game. So honestly, the game just doesn't really feel that different from game to game, and I feel that even though you might enjoy your first few plays of it, it's going to start getting samey relatively quickly. So in summary, Bitoku has some good points about it. I love the setting it uses, and I think it's one of the most beautiful games I have seen this entire year. It does have some cool little mechanics with what you do with the dice. It is still engaging to play a point salad game and feel like everything you do is its own little reward, but there's a few questionable balance ideas. There's a lot of setup, a lot of takedown, a lot of rules teach. The rulebook's not perfect. There's, not a huge amount of variety in the game despite the amount of stuff that you have to set up, and I wish it was a little bit more thematic even, and I know it's good that it's got that new setting, but at the end of the day you're just collecting tokens for points. That's kind of the shtick, and so it feels a little bit disappointing compared to the hype that this was getting pre-Essen. Not to mention that really, I only really want to play this at 2 players, 3 absolute max. The solo is just too much going on for me to want to play it, particularly as all the actions that the AI can get can just drag it out quite a while. Whereas with 4 players, the game's taking 3 hours to play, and honestly, I'd rather play a lot of other different Euro games for 3 hours. So really, I just want to play this with 2, and that's not a player count I get to the table very often. But I still think 2 is best. It's tight, it's, not as much to set up, and the game will be done a bit more quickly. quickly. So if you're 2 players looking for this, then you'll probably get more enjoyment out of it. But I've also got to consider other games in this genre, other point salads, because it's not like we haven't seen a ton of point salad Euros, and I go back a lot to Pulsar 2849, and even to an extent the Sandbox Fields of Arle. Fields of Arle, Sandbox Euro, can do whatever I like, everything gets me points. But that one feels more thematic, it feels more interesting, and I feel like I've built up a lot more in the space of time it takes me to play than in this. But then also with Pulsar 2849, there's more longevity because there's more variety in the board setups and the gold tiles that you can do, but it's also more streamlined. It's so much easier to teach. The game is done and dusted within 90 minutes to 2 hours. Doesn't have a solo mode, but then I'm not desperate to play the solo mode in this one either. So I'd much rather pull Pulsar 2849 off the shelf if it's going to be a theme that's dry anyway. So I just sort of feel like, why would I necessarily pick up this one and go through that extra setup and rules teaching hassle just to get what feels like a mid-weight game that's hiding in a heavy game shell? It's kind of odd, but that's kind of the way I feel. So Bitoku for me is getting an average 5 out of 10. And that may sound harsh, but that doesn't mean it's a bad game. It means average on my scale. It means that there's good things to say about it. Looks, nice setting, and some half-fulfilling, parts of the mechanics. But there's a lot of negatives in here that are pretty big negatives when you consider them all together. And when you consider the competition for a point salad game, I don't know why I would necessarily recommend this one over other ones like I've just mentioned, or even other point salads out there that are just a bit quicker and a little bit more streamlined to play and enjoy. So this one, if you're looking for a game for 2 players, could maybe suit you well. But if you're a 4-player group, I don't recommend this, it's too long. If you're looking to get this for solo mode, you might get some enjoyment out of it, but it's going to take you a while, I do warn you. But maybe if you're looking to play this at only 2 to 3 players, you'll get the biggest enjoyment out of it. Now, like I say, not to say I hate the game, I think the game is fine, but I'm not going to seek it out, I'm not going to hang on to my copy, and if I don't play it again, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. But I'm glad I tried it, and I do applaud Devir for trying something a bit different, and that's what I want to encourage. Yes, okay, for me, this one didn't work out so well. But that's not to say I don't want publishers to try and step out of their comfort zone a bit more often and do these new settings, try these new themes, try to do something that they haven't done before. Like I say, Devir tend to do light games. So to do something as heavy and involved as this is, it's a jump. It's a jump. And I give you credit for trying. Didn't work out, but like I say, try again next time. I'd like to see what you come up with next. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, please remember to leave a thumbs up and a comment. It means the world to me. You know you appreciate the content, and I like to engage with my community to hear your thoughts on this. Was Bitoku more of a hit for you? Is there a group that you've been really enjoying this game with, or do you share some similar thoughts to mine, or are there some other negative aspects that you thought of that I didn't? I'd be interested to hear what you have to say, so leave a comment and I'll be sure to read and respond as soon as I can. And of course, if you want to check out more content on this channel, then my top 100 is moving swiftly on with my 30 to 21, or maybe you want a much more meaty, heavy point salad game, then Golem that I reviewed recently is probably one you might want to check out. So take care, and remember as always, whether this is the game for you or not, it's still at the end of the day, only a game. Take care, bye for now.